Next up, we've got Caridy, who's going to give you a deep dive on what we've been codenaming the Modown project, which is a very interesting collection of very useful NPM platform packages.
Thank you, Jenny. So every year, at least every few years, we see some big changes in our industry, some shift in the way we do things. And we believe we are in the middle of one big shift right now. Eric, during the keynotes this morning, he mentioned some of these things that are happening, and also some of the work that we have been doing to address those changes that are coming really fast, and we need to be prepared for it. And today, I'm really pleased to introduce you to one of the projects that we have been working on during this year, and we will see is really excited for us to be able to finally share some pieces. So I will give you a sneak peek of this project, codename Modown, and hopefully we will have time to explain why Modown. But I will be covering some of the motivations of this project, some of the goals, what are we today in terms of progress. We have been working on it for almost a year, at least in principle. There are some examples in the presentation. Yes, so I will show you some code, a little bit of code. I also want to touch on the areas that we are focused right now. We are actively working on it. We have a few people from the team working on this full time, and I want to show you some of the pieces that we are planning to deliver really soon. And finally, the things that you can start using today. You can start using some of the pieces, so I will show you some of those. But the first thing that probably comes to your mind is why we need another project. We already have 3 major projects in our team, and we need a lot of work to do on those 3 projects. Why bring in a new project to the table? So hopefully, I'll try to give you some details, but let's talk about motivation for Modown, why we decided to go and create this project. First of all, we are seeing more and more web applications becoming single-page applications. This is a big topic today. Everyone is trying to do single-page application, and the whole process has been really fast, like a bunch of new frameworks, Amber, Angular, Backbone, everything. Everyone is trying to do single-page application today. And we figured that we want to be in that wagon as well, even though we have the application framework, the YUI Application Framework. And even though this application framework that Eric and the other guys from the team created a while ago has been very successful within the YUI community. It doesn't solve all the problems, especially the problems that are related with the server side, Node.js, and how to do things there. And it also the fact that the learning curve to be able to use the application framework, the YUI application framework, is still very steep. And because you have to know YUI. You have to learn YUI to be able to use those pieces. There's nothing wrong with that, but we think we can do a little bit better. And another motivation for Modown is the fact that Mojito, and for those who are not familiar with Mojito, we released this product about a year ago, which is an MVC application framework that we released as part of the YUI strategy to open source some major products that we have, and eventually it made it into the YUI. So now it's part of the YUI team. The Mojito team is also part of the YUI team today. So Mojito has some big constraints for certain type of single-page application. You know, there are many different ways of doing single-page application, and I will try to cover some of them. But the fact that Mojito has some constraints means that we need to address those constraints in Mojito or do something else. So let me tell you a little bit about the story behind that. So about a year ago, we released Mojito. We were pushing really hard within Yahoo to get more people to use it, to get the big guys at Yahoo, Search, Media, Flickr, and so on, to use this Mojito platform. And some of them were really reluctant to use it. I will not get into too much details about that. I see some smiles there. But the reality was that we spent quite some time, a bunch of people into a room for many weeks trying to figure out how to make changes in Mojito to support the use cases that they brought to the table. And we figured after a while that it was really difficult to do. And the changes in Mojito were big, and we really have no resource to address that, and also the fact that those are very different use cases. So what we came up with was the idea to create some sort of looking into this from a different perspective and be able to create some sort of components that could potentially power all these different frameworks that were coming up from different areas of the company. So I will get in more details about this later on, but at the moment we have these three major frameworks within the Yahoo, within Yahoo, and one of them obviously is Mojito and what we are doing for Mojito next. The other one is what the Flickr team is doing. We call Hermes. It's not open source, so you cannot use it. Oh, there's no way you use it. Ensembler from Media, and it's part of the Touchdown initiative. And those are the three major frameworks that we have today within Yahoo that are targeting the same type of applications, single-page applications. They just happen to use these Modown components that we create. We'll get more details on this, but what we want to do is just to provide these building blocks, and I will stress that, just building blocks for people to create frameworks or create just applications. And even beyond that, we want Modown to be able to provide building blocks for other frameworks. And you might be familiar with some of these frameworks. And no matter what kind of architecture those frameworks use, either if they use a thin server architecture like Angular, Backbone, Amber, and so on, or the other end of the spectrum, which is Mojito using thick stateless architecture, doesn't matter. You should still be able to use some of these Modown components. And this is going to be the focus of Modown, to support the creation of single-page application frameworks or just simple application directly. So how many of you are using Flickr? No one is using? Okay. So here is a video of the latest Flickr photo page, which was released few weeks ago, and I'll roll it for you guys. So as you can see here, it's only the photo page. You can go and click on next. You move around. You can use the arrows on the browser. You can see how the URL is actually changing every time. This is what single-page applications do. You can even go and send that URL by email. So you can copy, refresh the page, copy that, potentially send it by email or just open in a new tab. Hopefully we'll do it. But the point here is we are all used to this type of application now. It's common to see single-page application. And this particular product, this particular application, the Flickr page, photo page, was created on top of these Modown components that we have been creating for the last few months. But how can we measure the success of this? So, and we have Phil over there from Flickr. He can give you more details. But the rough number that we are getting at this point is that the new page, the new photo page, is twice as fast as the previous one in terms of the metric that is more important for them, which is the time to see the first photo. And then the other metric that is very interesting is the time to get the next photo, when you click on the arrow to get to the next photo. And this one is even better, is 3 times or more faster than the previous version, which requires to have a full page refresh. And the point here is that, as you can see, the user can switch between these different states, different pages, at a speed that is not even possible to do with the full page refresh. There's no way you can get to the speed that you do with the push state on the browser using the single page application principles. And doing all these things without really breaking the core features of the web, without breaking the history, without breaking the URL, without having to install anything on your browser, and even getting better SEO by doing that. Another important point about Modown is the fact that we really, really want to get back to our roots. When we create Mojito, or when Mojito was created, we were targeting this very specific use case, this very specific way to do things. We want to go back and look into what the roots for YUI and the YUI team are, and try to use them to move forward in terms of projects that we are working on. So when you look at Mojito, Mojito is a more traditional MVC framework. And it just prescribes the way that you have to do things. You cannot go out of those rails. There's no way you can bend things. And when you have to change things and do more advanced stuff, you will potentially be fighting the framework. So with Modown, we just want to get back to create low-level APIs, low-level building blocks, to be able to enable you to create more complex structures. That's what we want. That's what we have in YUI, very small core components. And with Modown, we just want to solve these hard problems, these very common problems that we have in front-end engineering, but without forcing you to do things one way or another. So on the same line, we figured that nobody wants to fight a framework. So who wants to start using a framework and then want to do some advanced things and then get stuck by the constraints that the framework put in place for you, and then you ended up hacking the framework, monkey patching the framework, doing something with it to try to do what you want to do. So we have seen this trend in the community that things are moving in the direction of the libraries. People are moving more into creating libraries than creating frameworks. And we have seen these over and over again. Nobody wants to create a jQuery or YUI framework anymore. It's too difficult. Instead, what we see is those micro libraries, those small libraries, those polyfills, those things that are easy to manage, small enough to have it out there ready, and then let the people to use it in different ways, using Grunt, using Bower, and using different tools to just get it ready as part of the application. And we expect to see the same happening for single-page application. Even though today, when you look at that market, most of the things that are there are frameworks like Amber, Angular, and so on. But we believe this is going to be transitioning to more library style. And we already seen those trends happening. Like when you look at Render from Airbnb, which is a similar application framework for single-page application, they say that this is a library, this is not a framework. It's actually a library for Express to be able to produce those single-page applications. The same happened for Handlebars. Handlebars is powering many different frameworks out there that are targeting single-page application. And Handlebars is just a library. And everyone is using it. We are using it. So with all the tools out there, there's no need to really create big, giant frameworks that are very tied together. It's better just to go and do these small libraries. And that's the kind of things that we plan to do going forward. And last but not least is the fact that we really want to do development on the up end. With Mojito, we have a big, big issue. We spent almost a year creating Mojito. Then we spent many, many months having the whole team working on getting this ready to be open source. Doesn't make sense anymore. So with Modown, we don't want to make the same mistake. What we want to do is to do development on the open. And you can see when you start looking into Modown components that from day one, we create those components in GitHub, open source from day one. There's no hazard to spend time just to get it ready for the market. Yeah, they are not very good at the beginning, but we're getting there. So let's talk a little about goals and what exactly are we trying to do here. As you already probably noticed, the main focus of Modown is going to be creating building blocks for single-page applications that are written in JavaScript, potentially to run in Node.js. But we don't want to create a new infrastructure. We don't want to just create something new and big to use to be able to use these components. Instead, what we want to look into the industry and see if there is anything out there that is good enough for us to build on top of. And something that is proven to be very effective is Express.js. So how many of you are using Express in some degree? Okay. So we really want to use Express, but that doesn't mean that Modown will not work in other infrastructure like Happy from a different perspective. We also want to look into those and see if Modown can potentially work on those in different infrastructures. But Modown components as today, they are mostly Express extensions. We'll see some examples of this. We also want to put some emphasis in the ability to render the initial state on the server side and then let the browser to take over from there. And Eric mentioned it, Clarence mentioned it in his presentation. This is something that we really think is going to be critical for us to move forward because of the performance implications of doing that. So what are we to date with this Modown thing? Let's get into what we have today. So to date we have 13 NPM modules, only 13. We have more in the pipeline, but for now only 13 are there that you can look at, where each of these NPM components are completely independent. You can install independently, you can potentially use independently, or you can mix them together and do something different with them. They are just building blocks, just like you are used to use the YUI core modules or the modules that you create for YUI. Same principle. So here is a graph, a distribution of those components, those 13 components that we have today. We have it in two different groups. The groups that are Express extensions and the groups that are related with the locator. And I'm sure none of you know what locator is. We will get to that. But Express, hopefully everyone is aware of, and these are just traditional Express extensions. We will see some example of these. Locator is more about being able to understand what are the capabilities of your application, and I will give you some examples in a bit. So who is using Modown today, Modown components today? Aside from the wedding website from Eric, which was kind of a showcase of those Modown components, like trying out, we have two major customers within Yahoo. We have Flickr and we have Media. And for those who don't know what Media is, you say Yahoo is Flickr, search, and then everything else is just Media. But it's the big guys. So for now, we have about a dozen of production properties that are using at least one of these Modown components. And we believe this is going to increase rapidly now that we have more infrastructures within Yahoo. In fact, we have these two major frameworks, or three major frameworks within Yahoo using Modown components. So this is going to be growing really fast. On the YUI side of things, because some of these Modown components are using YUI, we make some changes in YUI to support those components. And most of these changes are already there. And if you have been looking at the changes that we have been making on the app framework, you probably notice some of these changes. Yes, we have no docs. And probably when you start looking at those components and when you start looking and trying to search for Modown, you will probably find just a little bit of documentation. But who cares about documentation? We were talking about that a while ago. Who cares about that? But we have a lot of tests, and we have a good quality on those components. So they are very small, so easy to read. Code is really easy to understand, hopefully. If not, you can talk to Eric. But all the examples and all the documentation are in the repos for each of these NPM components. So enough with the talking, let's see some code. The first example that I want to show you is the Express YUI extension, because you're YUI developers, you want to probably use YUI in your Express application. You're creating an Express application, you use YUI on the client side. So how can we facilitate the use of YUI on your Express application? And the first one is only targeting core modules. So only being able to use, or if you are only using some of the pieces from the core, you are not creating any special module or anything. Very simple example. Hopefully everyone is aware of Express and how to use Express. This is just very simple structure for an Express application. You require Express, you create an instance of the app, and then you listen for traffic on 3000, port 3000. There's nothing fancy here. Then you have just a route definition there. The first thing that you have to do, you really want to have YUI as part of your Express application, is going and extend Express with the Express YUI extension. And you will see this over and over again on Modown. This is the way that you extend Express. And as I mentioned before, Modown components are mostly Express extensions. So you have to go and just call extend and pass the app. You will get that app extended. New features will be available in that app, new functionalities, and even monkey patching Express in some cases when we need it. The second step is to go and expose YUI to the client side. And Clarence mentioned this state object during his presentation, but basically it just let Express YUI to produce a configuration and a boilerplate or bootstrap code that you will be able to use on the client side. And this configuration and this bootstrap coding is just what we need to get YUI ready on the client side. So you don't have to go back and do what you're normally doing in your templates by putting the script tag pointing to a specific version of the library from CDN, that kind of things. You don't have to do it anymore because you are producing the state of the application on the server side. And this state will define how YUI should work on the client side. We'll get more details about this, but that's the basic configuration that you need. Just saying, I just want to expose using this middleware called expose to get YUI ready on the client side. And of course, you can tweak the configuration. We provide a lot of sugar for that. So if, for example, you are developing offline, or you are developing and you have your own version of YUI serving in your corporate network or whatever, you can go and say, oh, I just want to use YUI core modules from the app origin. So now the application knows that whenever you're using a YUI module, it will go and get it from the Express application directly rather than going into CDN if you are in a flight from Miami to San Francisco, for example. So or just using the traditional apply config. This is standard equipment in YUI. If you use YUI, you probably use this thing. Just to set up some specific settings saying, I just want this version, this instance of YUI to not fetch any CSS whenever I'm using any component. So you just use that in the traditional way, just using a little bit of different API. You just call the app, which is the Express application, and then you call YUI apply config. But how to get into the client side? This is all server-side code. This is app.js for your Express application. How can you get these things on the client side? When it comes to the client side, obviously you have to make changes in your templates. And probably this is the template that you are rendering. And depends on the engine that you use. If you use handlebars, and we hope you use handlebars, you just use a triple curly bracket so you avoid escaping because state is already sanitized. So it's already secure to use just state there. Hopefully secure. If not, you can talk to Ryan. But you use micro or DOS or whatever engine you use, it's just that. And this state object is just this giant or not so giant JavaScript blob that you can just dump into your page in a script tag. And you can see here there's no script tag saying you need to go and fetch YUI from the CDN. There's nothing like that. So what's next? Next step is to go ahead and use the Sugar API that we provide. I mentioned the bootstrap coding that will be provided by Express YUI. In this case, it's similar to what you normally do, but you just need to wrap it around this app.yui.ready, saying, you know what, wait for YUI to get ready on this page, and then let me do something with it. We are familiar with that pattern. And that's what we normally do in YUI. It just happened to be an extra step that you have to do before you start using YUI and the use statement from YUI as you normally do. Why? Because we bake every single best practice that we have learned over the years into this boilerplate or into this bootstrap code that we put in place. That means, for example, that you don't have to specify the YUI version. We can pick that up from the package.json, the dependencies that you use in your Express application. We can also switch between different versions of the libraries, like debug version or production version, depending on the YUI version that you have there, and depending on the node configuration that you have there, things like that. And most important, we are able to go and inject YUI there without blocking the execution of the rendering process on the browser. Why? Because we inject it dynamically. We get them ready for you. We set up that instance for you. So whenever you are ready to use it, everything is ready for you to just start using some modules. But what about custom modules, which is what we do? We create YUI modules. We get those modules ready. Then we want to use those modules in our application. So the second example is a little bit more complex, addressing that, which is the most interesting part, I guess. We start from the same code that we had before: Express, extension, Express YUI, getting that ready, getting that exposed to the client side, and so on. The first step is going to be to do the same thing that we do on the client side, being able to wait for YUI to get ready before you start getting traffic. Why? Because now you're using not only core modules, but also your custom modules. And for us to be able to understand what are the custom modules that are available in your application, we do some asynchronous process there to try to figure out what's available for your application. So that's why you have to wrap it around into a ready state. Not a big deal. Aside from that, you just go and start using modules on the server side as well. So if you happen to want to use some of these YUI modules that you create on the server side, you just go and use it in the traditional way that you normally do it on the client side. In this case, I'm just requesting or using this model foo, creating an instance of it. Nothing fancy there. Then going and loading data using the model implementation. And using that data to just render that out into a template. Just a simple Express pattern, not a big deal here. Now, what is interesting is that data that you're using to render the HTML, you can also go and use expose and send it to the client side. And Clarence mentioned that as well in his presentation. This is the way that we foresee that we can just go and send data, also render data in a form of HTML, and get ready that data on the client side to do more advanced configurations, more advanced or enhancing the page, or just waiting for the user to do something to use that data rather than going to fetch that from an API directly. And when it comes to the client side, what you have to do is exactly the same thing. You just wait for ready, same that we had before. You just use that custom module. It's available for you to use. And then you do whatever you want with it. Even if what you want is just create an instance of that model and then using the data that was sent from the server side to rehydrate that model and get it ready from start so you don't have to go and load it again. But what happens if you use PHP, for example? You don't have Express, so what's the deal with this? So you notice I haven't touched anything in terms of configuration. There's no loader metadata that you have to define. I don't have to say my module is here, go and load it. And What are the dependencies of my module? None of this configuration is relevant anymore because Express YUI will do that for you. It will build that structure in memory for you. It will send it to the client side, and the client side can just choose whatever module you have. Imagine having to do this manually today. You do that manually, probably creating all these huge structures with all the modules and all that. This thing can do it for you because we can analyze the file system, analyze whatever is available in your application, and figure out what are the capabilities of your application and get it ready for you to use it. So let's talk about the file system abstraction. This is part of the process that we apply to be able to understand whatever you have in your application or whatever you can use. Locator. So the file system abstraction is happening because we have this locator component, part of the Modown components that apply this process to try to understand whatever you have in your application. So why do we need this abstraction? Aside from the fact that we want to understand what is there, we can do that in a build process. And hopefully we can also make locator to work in a build process. We are working on that as well, so you can use it as a grunt task before you actually build your application, so you don't need to wrap it into the ready state, as I mentioned before. So according to Mr. Folta, which is down there, locator gives semantic meaning to files in the file system. What exactly is that? Just looking into whatever you have there, trying to identify the pieces, what is a template, what is a YUI module, what is a configuration, what is a language bundle, and then using that information to create this internal configuration that we can use to set up YUI to work properly. What does this mean? In other words, it means that it is all about understanding the capabilities of the app. What exactly can your app do, depending on the components that you install as dependencies of your app and the custom code that you write for your app. So how to manage, in a sense, how can we know what are the YUI modules method that we need to generate? How to compile those templates and so on. How to compile language bundles, as I mentioned before. So it is all about conventions over configuration. Before we had to write those configurations manually. Now we just follow some conventions, and you are in control of those conventions using Locator. Locator allow you to do all kind of crazy stuff that you can think about in terms of organizing the code and naming conventions and so on. It's all on your control. So imagine doing this manually as you do it today. It's pretty difficult. So to wrap up, things that we are actually working on, actively we are working on internationalization and globalization in general. Eugene and Tony are working actively on getting a new Modown components or few Modown components that will address this problem. And there's nothing out there to really get a solid infrastructure for internationalization when it comes to single page applications. Amber has some extension that you can use. Angular is a little bit better on that, but we really think that we can create something very compelling for people to use in terms of internationalization. Composition. Juan and Clarence will probably be working on this really soon. This is a big, big problem. The way that Amber does composition of the layout, the way that Mojito does it, completely different. So how can we create a component that address or at least support these two different approaches or even other approaches? So we'll be working on this really soon. ES6 module, you probably noticed that this is a big, big topic for us, and our team is working full speed to try to get ES6 modules ready. Imagine in the example that I show you that model foo is actually not a YUI module, but an ES6 module. And you can use it not only in the example through YUI, but you can use it everywhere. Imagine that kind of things that we could potentially do tomorrow. UA data binding. UI data binding is a big topic. There are many different players. Handlebars is trying to figure this out, like how updating models get reflected in the UI. Facebook, React from Facebook, really done a tremendous job. They're really good, looking very good. we have other people. I know that Meteor also has some UI data binding there as well. And finally, we call it modernization of YUI. Like, how can we look back into YUI and see if we can apply the same principles that we are doing for this? Like promises. I want to use YUI promises in my little Express application. Why do I need to bring the whole YUI with me? Maybe I should just use another promise library. But I like that one because it's a good quality. And I like one, so I want to use that one. So hopefully we will be able to do that. So some final notes. The most important one is the fact that Modown is not a framework. You cannot install it. You cannot Google it. You go on Google, you will find nothing. So it's not a framework. It's not a product. So we don't consider this like a product. Modown is just a principle. We just want to create this very compelling small pieces that you can install, you can mix together, and you will get something that probably will be amazing. And that's pretty much it. Thanks.